because I'm supporting seniors, senior week, spiritware, woo, go seniors. We're reviewing Unit 9, Social Psychology. The first stuff that we went over, probably in your Unit 9 Day 1 notes, is all about attribution. The thing they love to ask about the most with attribution is the FAE. Does anybody remember what FAE stands for? The fundamental attribution error. Very good job. What does that mean? You knew what it stood for. What does it mean? It's when you do what? What does that mean in like normal words?
So like you say someone is dumb because they
Great. You make a false assumption about somebody. Maybe you interact with them one time and you say they're dumb, they're stupid, they're drunk, they're a loser, they're the worst. You make an assumption about their personality or their disposition. That's the fundamental attribution error. We all do it. We typically, if we're talking about our own actions, we have a good reason for what we do. This is called the self-serving bias. We make ourselves look good. We kind of put others down, but we make ourselves look good. What is a consensus? What does it mean? If there's a consensus, it means that, anybody? It means that everybody agrees. False consensus is when you think everybody agrees with you and they really don't. It could be about food or what the next step in the project should be or your favorite kind of music. You think people agree with you and in reality they don't. It's false consensus effect. Confirmation bias is when we make up our minds about something and it's really hard to convince us of something new or that we're wrong. It's like once we make up our minds about something, we only look for information that will confirm or validate what we already think. We don't look for new information. We just want to be right. The just world hypothesis. You remember our sad story about the woman with the lovers and the bridge and the ferry and she died because the robber stabbed her? And the arguments we had about whose fault it was. The just world hypothesis is that like we want the world to be a fair place. We want good things to happen to good people and bad things to happen to bad people. And our brain tries to come up with reasons why. If something bad happens to Molly, we say, well, she must have deserved it. She must have done something bad to make that bad thing happen. If something good happens to Kayla, we say, well, she probably deserved it because she did these good things. She worked really hard at this and that. We try to make the world seem fair. That's the just world hypothesis. The halo effect. Anyone remember the halo effect? We watched a video, we talked about people who have one positive trait, like maybe if they are attractive or tall, or if you find out one thing about them, like their political party or their club or their team, based on the one thing you learn about them, you think that other good things are true about them. Like you think that if you find out that they're an AP biology, you're like, oh, they must be a smart, hard worker. That's like the halo effect. You take one thing, like a halo, and you just imagine they are good and perfect as a result. Yes, ma'am.
So, like, I guess that's mixed up with the fundamental attribution, as the fundamental, is it kind of a negative thing, and the halo is more of a positive thing?
The FAE is you always making a negative assumption about someone. They do something, so yeah, they kind of go together. The FAE is they do one negative thing, and you just assume they're a negative person. The halo effect is like you find out one good thing about them, and then you just assume that everything about them must be good and perfect. What a great connection. Yes, they go together. Zoomers, any questions about stuff related to attribution and how we explain people's behavior? Anything in your notes from Unit 9, Day 1 that you're like, oh, Mr. Jones, could you go over this, please? Do you think Timothy has his notebook with him while he's riding down the road? He's saying no. All right, let's take a look at some other things from Unit 9, slide 2 of 5. Social influence. So there's different aspects of gender, right? We have gender typing or gender stereotypes when you make assumptions about how people should act based on cultural interactions. We talked in this unit about race and how you are better at telling people apart from your own race, but you might get people mixed up from other races because of how your brain works. Ethnicity as being a social thing. Self-fulfilling prophecy, this is bolded. The experiment was with Rosenthal and Jacobson with kids. It's related to the Pygmalion effect, where they told the teachers that the kids were going to be really smart. And guess what happened with those kids? They got really smart. They had better scores. It turns out that they just chose random kids. But when you believe something is true, you act a certain way, and then that thing becomes true. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It can be a good thing, like the Pygmalion effect. It can also be a negative thing, like the Gollum effect. If I believe that Esther hates me, so I'm rude to Esther, well, she might actually end up hating me. So low expectations lead to low results. High expectations lead to high results. Number 3, attitude formation. We talked about the 2 ways to persuade people. Which route, central or peripheral, is the one that you use when they have the time and energy to listen to your argument? What kind of argument should you make? Central or peripheral? If they have the time to listen to you, you should use the central route. The direct route. You say, hey, I want to convince you, here's my data. That's the central route. It's very direct. You have good logic. You have the data, the numbers. No. You're thinking of something else. Central is, it's just like you're being direct with them. It's more about like how clear you're making the argument. Peripheral is when you're trying to be sneaky. So peripheral kind of means off to the side. It's like a sneaky way of trying to convince people. You use the source. It's like when you say things like, well, Ford is going, so I should be able to go too. That's the peripheral route. You're being sneaky, you're playing off of their emotions and things. So the elaboration likelihood model is just a fancy way of saying that, and maybe you think about the word care, starts with a C. If they really care about the issue, you use the central route. Okay. More often with your parents, y'all use the peripheral route. Y'all use the sneaky route with your parents. Like you don't have the time to create a good argument, or they don't have the time to sit down and listen to you. So you just like try and give them like an emotional reason to do the thing. Cognitive dissonance. I told you the other day we would talk about cognitive dissonance. This was Festinger's experiment where he had people lie about how fun the study was. And the people who lied for not very much money, they actually convinced themselves that the experiment had been fun. If you lie for a ton of money, you don't have to convince yourself of anything because you're like, yeah, I lied because they gave me $100. Someone only gives you $1 and you lie for them. You don't want to admit that. So you say, no, that study was actually fun. So cognitive dissonance is when you convince yourself. Cognitive dissonance, convince yourself. You change your thinking because it's so uncomfortable to have these 2 conflicting thoughts in your mind. The mere exposure effect. What does this say about people and ideas and songs? The more you are around them, the more you experience them, the more you end up liking that person or song or idea. So it's just being around things makes you like them more. Slide 3 of 5. This is the most famous 3 psychology experiments. Solomon Asch. Do you remember what his study was? It involves conformity. He said, don't conform, be a solo man. Yeah, he did 3 lines, and then you were given a line, and you would say the line on the right is most similar to which line on the left. And he had confederates, he had actors pretending, kind of going along with his study to kind of trick people. And they want to see, would people conform or would they do their own thing? And he found that a lot of the time people will conform. They give into, do you remember what kind of social influence they give into? When they want to appear normal and be liked? It's called normative social influence. So conformity, normative social influence. Or sometimes they just think that people are right. That's informational social influence. You just think they're right. They have more information than you, so you do what they do. But either way, it's conformity, going along with other people. Milgram. What was Milgram's study? The shocks. Yeah, like 1,000 volts, milligram, 1,000 volts, a million milligram, I don't know, 1,000 volts. Yeah, he did a thing where he told people, you must continue, the experiment must go on. Were they actually shocking a stranger? No. Did they think they were shocking a stranger? Yeah, and they just kept doing it. They complied. They obeyed what they were told to do. He found that when people are pressured like that, if they can kind of blame someone else for the pain and the problem, they'll do the thing. They'll listen to authority figures. What was Zimbardo's experiment now, Bailey? He locked the people in the basement. The Stanford prison experiment, where he found that prisoners acted like prisoners. They became helpless, learned helplessness, and that the guards became these harsh, cruel individuals. And he said that, wow, that when people are put in this situation, they act accordingly. All right, and a lot of ethical problems with this experiment, obviously, because they didn't take care of the participants. It relates to actors. What do you mean? They play a role. I mean, people think, but like people think that like, y'all know about Heath Ledger, like when he played the Joker. Like some people say that he got so messed up from like taking on this role that like when you're put into a role, it's hard to like separate reality from what you're pretending to do. And that's kind of Zimbardo's idea. Is like they live into the thing that's expected of them. So, any questions about these experiments? Make sure you can tell the difference between them. They love to ask about them. Could be on the FRQ, could be on the multiple choice for your actual exam. Standard 5, about how we interact with others, is altruism, being mean or nice to others. Altruism. It's being nice, it's sacrificing. It comes from the same root as the word altar. Like you would sacrifice on an altar. Altruism, A-L-T-R, same root word. You sacrifice yourself to help other people out. You give away your money, you give away your time, not because you want anything in return, but just because it's the right thing to do. You are intrinsically motivated to do so. Aggression, they say, typically when people are aggressive, men physically, women more emotionally aggressive, socially aggressive, they typically say it's because there's something that you want that you've not been able to obtain or get. And that's why you act out and are mean to others. Attraction, we talked about the different laws of attraction, facial symmetry, proximity, similarity. You do nice things for them, they'll do nice things for you. All those theories are about what makes you like the people that you like. 2 slides left. Group behavior. So what day was this in our notes? I showed y'all the clip from To Kill a Mockingbird where that crowd, that mob was going to do something. This is day 4, so we're unit 9, day 4 notes. Awesome. De-individuation, you lose your sense of identity. You do things you normally wouldn't do. Group polarization, to become polarized is to be extreme. You do things as a group that y'all wouldn't do on your own as well, that are more extreme. Group think is when you don't think. You just try and keep your boss happy. So you just kind of go along with what everyone else is doing. What story did I give you all about the bystander effect? What article and video did we watch? Poor Kitty Genovese. Yeah, people watched her get killed. They didn't do anything about it because of responsibility diffusion. They didn't feel responsible. Social facilitation. When something becomes fácil, what does that mean? It becomes easier. It's when other people are watching you, it actually helps you out. You actually get better at the thing you're doing because you're being watched. It's like you do better in a crowd, or you do better with people paying attention to you. You work harder when your boss is looking at you. When your teacher is standing over your shoulder, you actually focus on your work. That is social facilitation. Ethnocentrism, when you think that your people group or social group is better than others, this is not a good thing. It leads to prejudice, bias, and discrimination. Which of these 3 is an action? Prejudice, bias, or discrimination? Yeah, discrimination is the action. We all have unconscious biases. Y'all took that test and hopefully did that IAT reflection on how we all have implicit bias. We don't mean to, it's just kind of the way our brains work. We judge other people. We like certain kind of people better than others because of who we know more about, what we see in the news and the media. So we have mental prejudices, but discrimination is when we act on those prejudices. Scapegoat theory is when we blame people who are less powerful than us. So bad things happen and we find someone to blame. And oftentimes it's the result of stereotypes about a racial group, an ethnic group, a gender group. At high school, it could be about like a clique or a club or a sports team, but we like to stereotype people and I like to blame people when bad things happen. Questions about any of these terms or anything from unit 9, day 4 notes as you're flipping through your notebooks? Anything that I did not cover that you want me to review? Okay, the last slide for us to cover is more about how groups influence each other. So we did talk about Kitty Genovese already with the bystander effect. We talked about social facilitation. Here's a new word. If social facilitation means being watched makes you better at the thing, what do you think social inhibition does? It makes you worse at the thing. It's when being watched hurts you. How many of you, when your teacher or coach watches you, you do worse? It stresses you out, you do worse under pressure? That's called social inhibition. All right, you get worse at the thing. In-group and out-group. In-group is your friends, your clique, or the out-group is the people who are the opposite of you. When people are not in our group, we kind of treat them all the same, right? If you are black, you might think of all white people as having similar interests. If you are white, you might think of all black people as having similar interests. You kind of group people together who are not like you and just assume that they all have similar interests or skills or hobbies or traits. Not true at all, but that's the way that your brain works. It doesn't take the time to get to know people if they're not in your clique, your group, your people. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is when you treat people the way they've treated you. What's another way of phrasing that, like real short? To reciprocate is that you do for them what they did for you. But what could I put? Like, it's like give and take, return the favor, mirroring. What would you call this? What's a short way of thinking about this? What? But if they're mean to you, you're mean back. Okay, so yeah. Reflecting, mirroring, just like make sure you have your notes. So reciprocity. Same vibe. Yeah. Social norms, we talked about wanting to appear normal, wanting to fit in. Social traps, prisoner's dilemma. It's when like you have decided whether to be selfish or cooperate. If you're selfish, it might help you for now, but it's going to hurt the group in the long run. And if everyone chooses to be selfish, it's really bad. That's the idea of a social trap or a prisoner's dilemma. Muzaffar Sheriff, do you remember what his experiment was? Muzaffar Sheriff, what did he do with the little boys? He took them to the camp. He got them to hate each other, and then he found that if you could make them work together on big, important goals, super ordinate goals, big, important goals that applied to everyone, that's how they would reduce their prejudice. They would hate each other a little bit less if you force them to work together. Anything you see in your notes from Unit 9 that you want me to review? Flip through your Unit 9 notebooks. Any terms or phrases you're confused by? This stuff should be freshest because it's what we did just right before spring break. It's only a few weeks old. So hopefully it's still in your brain. Let's look at, I think we got 7 practice questions. Yes, ma'am. You could have to know about Sternberg's triarchic theory of love. Yeah, you could need to know about the 3 components for sure. What were they? Remind us. Passion, commitment, and intimacy, the 3 aspects of love. All right, some sample questions. Jesse and a friend are driving in rush hour traffic when a car suddenly cuts in front of them in order to reach an exit ramp. Jesse's passenger points out that the circumstances may have required the other driver to do so, while Jesse loudly criticizes the personal qualities of the other driver. Jesse's response is best explained. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, Jesse is committing the fundamental attribution error. Very good. This is an interesting one. It's about the overjustification effect. Let me read it. A researcher gave identical puzzles to 5-year-old children in 2 groups, Group A and Group B. The children in Group A were promised candy if they completed the puzzles quickly and well. The children in Group B were not promised a reward, but were just encouraged to do the best they could. If the researcher argues that overjustification occurred, which of the following likely happened? Overjustification effect says that when you offer a reward, what happens? What's the overjustification effect? When you're offered a reward, you don't put in as much effort, you lose your intrinsic motivation. So what do y'all think the answer is? 1, 2, 3. D. The group that got the reward, they end up not working as hard, not doing as well, and they're not going to do puzzles in the future because they're like, why would I do it? They paid me to do it last time. I'm not going to go do a puzzle for fun.
Jones?
Yep.
Can you send Kayla Williamson down to see me for just a minute?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
No problem. Front office. Front office, go that way. Next question. Most professionals in the United States, they rate themselves as being better than other people. What do we call this? When people make themselves look better. 3, 2, 1. D. The self-serving bias. They make themselves look good. They blame other people. They make other people look bad. They think that they're the best. Nope, never heard of that. Never heard of that. Self-actualization is when Maslow said you reach your potential. Yeah, it's like you worked your way up the hierarchy of needs. In baby X studies, researchers alternately dressed an infant in typical boys or girls clothing. So it's the exact same baby, but sometimes the baby's wearing boy clothes and sometimes the baby's wearing girl clothes. Adults who were asked to play with the infant treated the baby when it was in boys' clothes rougher than when asked to play with the exact same infant dressed in girls' clothing. Why do people do this? 3, 2, 1. Yeah, they're stereotyping. It's like they think that in some cultures, boys are tougher, they can handle it more. It was the exact same baby. Why is anyone playing rough with the baby? I don't know. They're shaking it. Yeah, throwing it, pushing it. I don't know. The frustration aggression hypothesis, that's a thing, says that aggression is, why are we aggressive towards people? Like 3 minutes ago, I said that we're aggressive because why? 3, 2, 1. Aggression is reactive. Like there was something you wanted, you couldn't get it, you're mad. So then you react to that frustration, that failure, that sense of inadequacy. They say that aggression comes from you are upset about something. So aggression is always, there's always a reason for aggression. That's the idea there of that hypothesis. So when Stanley Milgram, which experiment was Milgram?
Oh, the electric.
1,000 volts. He was the electrocution one, right? Where they said the experiment must go on, you must continue. He first asked psychiatrists to predict how far participants would go in administering shocks in his original demonstration. So how were people, did people know what was going to happen, or they were surprised? Why were they surprised? Was there more shocking or less shocking? There was more shocking than they expected. So the answer here is that beforehand, 3, 2, 1, C, they underestimated the level of shocking. Yeah. 2 more. Which of the following is true regarding cross-cultural studies on attribution? So what's the difference between collectivist and individualistic cultures in terms of attribution? Is America collectivist? We blame and attribute the culture and society, or are we individualistic? Okay, so what answer choice here talks about how? I have to read through. No, here in the U.S. we blame people's appearance way more. 3, 2, 1. Answer is C. Because we're individualistic, we blame people. Here in America, if one person does one thing wrong, we say they're a terrible person, they need to be canceled. Right? That's a very individualistic idea. The last practice question. Which of the following is the best example of social inhibition? With social inhibition, do you get better or worse when being watched? Worse. Great. So which of these is about someone who is doing worse because they are being watched? It's very obviously E. Someone who's already a bad bowler, they get even worse when their friends are watching. Which of these would be social facilitation? You get better while being watched. C would be social facilitation. Yeah. Questions? Fundamental attribution error is always negative. Then it's the self-serving bias. It's always about others. You're always making a negative assumption about others with the FAE. Cool. I'm gonna give you all 2 minutes to look through this free response and think to yourself how you would answer it. And then I'll have y'all grade an actual student's response. Here's the free response. At a school-wide pep rally preceding a big game at William James High School. I love it. They named their high school after the founder of functionalism. That's great. Each grade has a designated t-shirt color and seating area in the bleachers. Student leaders organize classes so that their colored shirts combine to form the school flag. The coach gives an exciting speech The cheerleaders perform a routine and the band plays the school song while the students sing in unison. Y'all,
That sounds brilliant.
every sentence, every phrase, if they put it in the free response, it's because they want you to use that phrase. So like, I'm guessing there's gonna, like of these 7 terms, one of them is gonna be about the t-shirt colors and the school flag. One is gonna be about, I don't know, the exciting speech. One's gonna be about the cheerleaders performing the routine. Like they specifically include the phrase that they did for the words that they did. So the prompt says, explain the behavior and perceptions of the participants in the pep rally using the concepts below. Be sure to apply the concepts to the scenario. So this is one of those where like, if you give a really good definition of conformity, but you don't give a made up example from the pep rally, they will not give you the point. So you have to have creative examples. I'm gonna give you all a couple minutes to look over this. If you're watching this on video, pause, try and think through it yourself. And in a second, we'll look at an example. All right, the cocktail party effect has to do with when there's lots of noise, you can pick out a particular voice or topic. So the most common example is someone being able to hear their name being said. So even though there's lots of noise in the crowd, Bailey can hear her name being said 3 rows down as she tries to listen in on their conversations. That's the cocktail party effect. It's you focusing on one thing. So if you're wearing a red shirt, if you have to say something like, even though there's all the noise, when the assistant principal starts talking to the red shirt kids, the kids in the red shirts like are able to pay attention to that voice because it applies to them. So yeah, that's the cocktail party effect. De-individuation, you do things you wouldn't normally do because you're in a crowd. Which lobe does the occipital lobe control? What does it do? It's in charge of what? Vision, okay. Conformity, we talked about. Do you remember what figure ground had to do with? We'll look at it in a second. Gestalt is figure ground. It's what are you paying attention to, what are you looking at, and what's in the background. We'll look at an example in a second. What kind of memories are procedural memories? They are long-term, but be more specific. It's a muscle memory. It's some sort of body action, implicit thing. All right, and then sympathetic, is that you getting, is that you relaxing or becoming more amped up? Sympathetic, more amped up. All right, so take a look at the student's response. They only got 2 of these 3 points. Try and figure out which of the points. But they talk about paying attention to one specific thing. What's the problem with number 1? All right, yeah, okay, that was too easy, but yeah. So they get point 2. Conformity is changing behavior to be like the crowd. So they define it and then they give an example. When the crowd cheers, you will cheer with them to go along, to not single yourself out. Normative social influence. Point 3, de-individuation is when you're with a group of people, you lose your sense of self and you may conform. So they define it, then they give an example. If the pep rally group is so riled up from the pep rally that they vandalize property and you go along with them participating in the destruction. That's not even a complete sentence, but they still got the point because they gave a good example. It's most important to give good examples. Take a look at what they did here for 4 through 7. They got 2 of these 4 points. See if you can figure out which 2 they got. Which points do you think they got? Good job. So 4 they missed. To get point 4 right, they would have had to say something about being able to distinguish between a specific part of the pep rally. So the scoring guidelines say like being able to see a specific cheerleader or coach against the bleachers, the court, or whatever's behind them. So here's some examples. The school mascot stands out as the figure in his bright yellow costume against the gym floor. They say there's a thing that stands out versus the background. Here's another example. The student can hear the coach's speech against the background of crowd noise. Figure, ground. You can pay attention to one stimulus even though there's a lot going on. They did not get point 6 because they did not talk about any sort of skill or muscle memory. So a good thing would have been the cheerleaders show procedural memory when they perform their routine. Or they could have said procedural memory is when the band can play their instrument without even thinking about it. That would have worked. What does SNS stand for? Yeah, it's okay if it's an abbreviation. You can use abbreviations while you're writing to save yourself some time. Just make sure that it's like a very clear abbreviation of the topic. Okay. All right. Let me talk while y'all are here about Friday, because I don't want to waste time on Friday going over instructions with y'all. I'm going to send this out on a remind Thursday night to refresh yourselves. But here's what your instructions are for Friday, whether you're doing it at home or in person. The following free response questions are previews of what will be on the AP exam. This assignment is meant to determine what AP score you are now on track for, so do not use your notes or the internet. Mr. Jones will be grading the FRQ with a 50-point curve. So as long as you get half the points right, I will give you a 100 in the grade book. Okay. So don't I do want you to study for this because it is going to be tough, but don't stress about it. Does that make sense? Like y'all are going to be fine. Note, y'all focus, please. This is for your performance final. Note, make sure that you define the terms and also give creative examples that apply to the situation and demonstrate you understand the concept. You should be spending an average of 3 minutes on each bullet point. So there will be 14 bullet points total, 7 and 7, 3 minutes each, takes you to 42 minutes. And that gives you a little bit of wiggle room since you'll have 50 minutes total. So take some time to read through the prompts. Start with the prompt you feel better about. I'd way rather you get like all 7 points on one and then kind of have to rush on the hard one. And like just get, oh, it's okay if you just get 1 or 2 on the hard one if you did so good on the easier one. So start with the easier one is what I always recommend. Answer every bullet point, even if you're not confident. It's better to write more than write less because you will not be penalized for extra incorrect information. So if you talk about psychoanalysis and the unconscious, and then you describe it as being client-centered therapy, even though that's a wrong fact, client-centered therapy isn't psychodynamic, it's what? Client-centered. Rogers, what was he? A humanist. Even though you say that wrong thing, they won't take points away from you for that. So it's better to put a little extra information in. You'll have 50 minutes total for the 2 free responses. That's the way it will be on the national exam and on Friday. For in-person people, I'm gonna ask you to have 2 sheets of notebook paper, black or blue pen. Do question 1 on one sheet, do question 2 on the other sheet. Don't like skip lines the entire time, but skip lines between bullet points, right? So if you were doing this prompt, you know, just like do a whole little mini paragraph about the cocktail party effect, skip a line, and then do your little paragraph on conformity, skip a line, mini paragraph about de-individuation. Digital folks, you can still write yours if you want on notebook paper, black or blue pen, if you really want to make this like the real one, if you're taking it in person, or just like type it directly into an email to me and you'll just send me an email with either the attachments of your handwritten version, or you can just like type it up and send it to me. So I'll post this. It'll be posted whatever time y'all's class starts on Friday at 12:30, and y'all have 50 minutes for it. Any questions about the performance final? Okay, so we are going to play a Kahoot, kind of short Kahoot, just go old school today to get ready for y'all's performance final. Y'all do have to do progress check 9 by Friday. I think we'll have time to both play the Kahoot and still let y'all do progress check 9. Make sure y'all are spending some time going through your notebooks to study, retake your old tests. There's a ton of fun resources and study guides on eClass and practice activities and matching questions and study guides and mnemonics. So y'all can go through the eClass resources. There are crash course videos you can watch to review social psych and all the other content. You can rewatch my homework videos. You can also go on my Quizlet, and all this stuff is linked online. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?